What if you could slide into 1,000 different worlds?
It's a show about a group of reluctant travellers shifting between alternate reality versions of the same planet, but crucially, not a series about miniature hamburgers. I mean, would it really have killed them to add more miniature hamburgers just to avoid confusion?
I agree with you.
Instead, it's a show about going somewhere that's the same, but different, but similar, but different enough, but not really the same.
Come on, we're gonna miss the slide.
Sliders. Excuse me. Sliders.
What do you think? 5 hours? That should give us time to explore and still be home by midnight.
Sliders was a 1990s science fiction series created by former Star Trek The Next Generation writer Tracy Torme and the producer of the Naked Gun movies Robert K. Weiss. It ran for 5 seasons on 2 different outlets, filmed in 2 different cities, and ended with more cast changes than a live soap opera where most of the cast have come down with severe food poisoning during the first commercial break.
I cannot believe they made a TV show about us.
Likewise, behind the scenes, Sliders turned out to be a bit of a mess. Whether or not any viewers at home noticed is up to the individual viewer.
Unbelievable.
Writer Tracy Torme was inspired by an idea of what America would have been like had George Washington not survived the War of Independence.
George Washington was hanged in 1779, a mere footnote in British colonial history.
Well, that is fascinating.
Robert K. Weiss was interested in parallel universes, such as had been shown occasionally in installments of The Twilight Zone. But no one had ever really explored that as a premise for a television series.
Is that good news or bad news?
I mean, time travel. Pfft, everyone did time travel. The real hotness was in alternate realities, parallel universes, different dimensions, that sort of thing. Sliders would debut 25 years before the idea of the multiverse was cool, and about 26 years before they had been done to death.
We're Sliders.
For its first 2 seasons, Sliders would be shot in Canada, much like Uncle Reg after he tried to cross into British Columbia with a fake passport.
We're from Canada.
Later seasons were shot in and around Los Angeles. And again, Uncle Reg and airport metal detectors, they just don't mix.
Don't do it!
Go now.
Don't do it!
Push, go!
Most new worlds were variations on our world, just with some delicious twist, or in lieu of a delicious twist, perhaps a fairly ordinary one.
Good heavens, the union of Los Angeles and San Francisco goes against the laws of nature.
Later on, the big twist might have been the continuing threat from the Cro-Mags, or the fate of Sliders who just suddenly disappeared thanks to the show's producers seeming to be at war with most of the cast.
What's that supposed to mean?
The show featured various Sliders beginning with Quinn Mallory, Wade, the Professor, Rembrandt, and later on, Maggie, Colin, Diana, and Quinn Mallory again. I'll tell you later.
So how do we go about it?
Sliders began in March of 1995 when a 2-hour pilot was broadcast on Fox.
But I can explain.
San Francisco-based physics student Quinn Mallory had been tinkering with new technology in his basement that, if it worked, would allow him to explore the universe in different ways. His professor, the tetchy Maximilian Arturo, is an erudite curmudgeon who is not impressed by Quinn all that much apart from begrudgingly recognizing the young man's brilliance.
You might at least do me the courtesy, sir, to pretend that you're listening to me.
Quinn supports himself with a job selling computers at a big box store where his friend Wade Wells has a bit of a crush on him.
Last night I perfected a timing device designed to return things from wherever it is they're going.
One day his tinkering leads Quinn to create a vortex in his basement. He steps in and after a ride through the world's worst water slide, he emerges in what looks like the same place that he started in. Except there are a few things different. When he returns home, he soon realizes that he had been replaced by an alternate version of Quinn from another reality.
Why would I kiss you? I mean, we're buds, right? It'd be like incest. What else did I do?
His alternate managed to offend the person who will decide his grades, Professor Arturo. And then he has a rather disconcerting conversation with another Quinn Mallory.
Each time you slide, you're spinning the wheel, never knowing where the ball will come up.
Quinn, telephone!
I'll call back!
Look, having a conversation with yourself has its pros and cons. I mean, there's always somebody who will finally laugh at your Warhammer in-jokes, but at the same time, games of rock, paper, scissors will often end in a draw. By way of explanation, Quinn attempts to demonstrate his invention to Wade and the Professor. When things don't go so well, a vortex swallows up the trio and also captures a passing Cadillac driven by a singer on his way to a comeback gig, Rembrandt Brown. They're not travelling forward or backwards in time, merely sliding sideways to a parallel dimension, an alternate reality where one small difference contrasts starkly with the traveller's point of origin.
Never seen anything like this. It's got numbers and no second hand. Where'd you get this thing?
Sliders is basically an adventure series based on the concept of what if, and changing what the if actually was each week.
That explains it.
Sliders wasn't a time travel show, but at the same time would do a very good impersonation of one in several important ways. Firstly, that whole Boston unable to control where they were heading was really the premise behind many science fiction time travel series, Voyages, The Time Tunnel, Quantum Leap, etc. And secondly, just by having the Sliders land on a planet that had advanced at different speeds from their point of origin,
Gwen believes it's for coins of some kind.
meant the team could arrive on a world that was basically a Western, but it's the 1990s, or a post-apocalyptic 1990s, which is the real grunge.
It is 1996, but from our perspective, events are occurring as if it was 12 years ago.
So bottom line, we have gone back in time.
Hold perfectly still.
Oh!
Their first slide, though, is to a frozen Ice Age version of San Francisco, but rather than freeze to death in the hours before their timer activates, they press their luck and open another portal, which will make any future control of slides more or less impossible. The closest I ever came to sliding was one hot summer when we put a sheet of plastic on the ground and made a water slide with the garden hose. Look, it's a long story, but I ended up splitting my head open on the fridge because, well, at the time we lived in an apartment. The quartet land in a version of the US where the Soviets had invaded. As happened often in early seasons, we would meet different versions of the main cast. Alternate Arturo is a collaborator, and Wade is a resistance leader.
Wade Wells is my commanding officer, and my lover.
Our team have to try and adapt to each world, with Rembrandt initially having the most trouble in wrapping his head around the constantly changing circumstances.
You're going to expose the sheriff, pardon Quinn, and introduce the concept of democracy.
Democracy?
The quartet have to work together in different situations each week where they land on a new world where there is one crucial difference from their original starting point, often known as Earth Prime.
How do you know that? Because I'm a slider.
The first season had stories where the group had landed on a world where the summer of love never ended. There was a major virus outbreak blamed on Quinn Mallory, but antibiotics hadn't been invented. A world where geniuses are treated like sports stars. A world where Rembrandt was still a massive star.
I'm from a parallel world.
Often the central concept was strong enough to string together an action-adventure plot mixed with some satire and light commentary, and which would also give the cast a chance to stretch themselves by occasionally playing alternate versions of their original characters. The better stories would build on the series' premise. On a world where the Manhattan Project had failed to build a working atomic bomb, an asteroid threatens to destroy the Earth until Arturo can get the bomb working and attach it to a rocket. Arturo has to work with an alternate of one of his students who turns out to be both a genius and a sociopath.
I promise you this, I will dedicate my life to isolating the gene that makes you so obnoxious, and I will destroy it.
While the sliders want to go home, they don't have any control over the destination. They have a small device, the timer, which will open a vortex, but only when the sliding window opens. So each episode has a countdown.
3, 2, 1.
Which helps with the drama. It's established later that if they miss the sliding window, they'll be trapped for 29 years before they can slide again. So the takeaway is, don't miss the slide unless you're on that planet where maple syrup is legal tender.
You blistering idiot!
Also, the timer is critical to their continued sliding. Thankfully, Sliders doesn't take the easy route of having them lose the timer. Well, not too often. The timer will occasionally develop a fault or is damaged, which amps up the pressure on our team. Early versions of the timer were based on a cell phone, while later on it looks closer to a television remote. So if it ever gets lost, look under the couch cushions.
Your clicker is definitely bigger than my clicker, and I say that without a trace of male envy.
The timer gains some upgrades over the years, or is swapped out for a better unit that gives them a larger sliding range and a little more control.
My name is Queen Tar. And now, I will destroy you all!
The Sliders would find all manner of variations of San Francisco, and for fun would run into the same people in different situations. Say, this taxi driver, or the clerk at the hotel, or the sassy waiter. The idea of staying in the same hotel in each parallel universe sounds interesting, but it does present a problem in that the points in the hotel's loyalty program will not transfer between universes.
J. Edgar Hoover, who was the ex-head of the FBI in our world, was president on this world for 22 years up until the time he died.
So?
Well, maybe they're not kilts. Maybe they're skirts.
Quinn Mallory is a genius college student who lives with his mother in San Francisco and dreams of discovering the secrets of the universe. Quinn would both be a young series lead and one of the smartest guys in the room.
I'm kind of a scientist.
He was nicknamed Cue Ball by Rembrandt, and Quinn would feel responsibility for this whole sliding mess with the burden of the group's safety resting heavily on his shoulders.
I don't know, Cue Ball. Maybe it's because you've gotten us into all of this, so you feel responsible for us, you know?
In his original universe, Quinn's father had died, and he would hopefully know if he was in the right universe if the front gate squeaked or not. And we will loop back to it later in the video, but later on there's a pretty major upending of Quinn's backstory.
Like if he's really bad, like all cut up in blood and shit all over him, I might have nightmares.
Jerry O'Connell had been a child actor who won good notices in the 1986 film Stand By Me.
I don't believe this.
And he would go on to appear in other shows before being cast in Sliders. O'Connell would eventually play a very large role in the series, writing, producing, directing, before disappearing from the series entirely.
You fish? I'm English. We invented fishing.
It's fairly unusual in a show like this to have two super smart characters, but with Maximilian Arturo, they had a walking science lecture cloaked in a grumpy academic who's also in a bad mood, got out of the wrong side of the bed, and hasn't had any caffeine.
And eat your Vegemite. You need to maximize your sperm count where you're going.
And where would that be?
Canberra.
Even when the group is bonded through slide after slide, Arturo can always be counted on to show his frustration with the others, with the situation, with their accommodations, with their food, and, well, whatever you got, he's annoyed with it.
And I have more brain in my pinky than you have in your entire head. Added to which, I am old enough to be your...
To be my grandfather, I know.
I was going to say your father.
The various Earths will every now and then throw up an interesting conflict for each of the characters, such as when Arturo would meet an alternate universe version of the love of his life. Welsh actor John Rhys Davies was already well known for appearing in films such as the Indiana Jones movies, and having grown frustrated by the series' direction, would be the first of the cast to leave the series.
How could it be worse when your judge is Dennis the Menace and your lawyer is a Debbie Gibson wannabe?
A few years later, he joined the cast of Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy as the dwarf Gimli, as well as the voice of Treebeard.
What's with the tears? You hit your head or something?
Yeah. Maybe I should have it examined.
Wade Wells starts the series off as somebody smitten with Quinn, but that will eventually dissipate, and Wade will just become her own person, a young woman trying to make sense of all the different worlds the quartet will find themselves in.
Sliding between parallel worlds doesn't bother you, but flying does.
You have no idea how much.
Wade knows computers, and she isn't a totally unwilling adventurer. She is wanting to get home, eventually, but in the meantime, let's see what's out there. Wade would later grow close to Rembrandt. At one point, he professed his love for her, or at least her soul. But even after her character was unceremoniously written out of the series between seasons, the character would be mentioned quite often. Wade would run into doppelgangers, fall in love, and become a goth in thrall to a vampire. Look, don't laugh, that happens way more often than I perhaps would like to admit.
That was the weird part.
When the series moved to the Sci-Fi Channel, Sabrina Lloyd's contract wasn't renewed over a pay dispute, though it's also been suggested that there had been some bad blood between Lloyd and new cast member Kari Wuhrer.
And I'm gonna miss you getting on my nerves, Wade. Same here.
Though if I had $1 for every series where at least two of the cast members didn't get along, I'd probably have enough to finance a big-budget animated version of Kramer vs. Kramer featuring the voice of Chris Pratt as Kramer, and also as Kramer, Chris Pratt.
I know, sometimes you say things and just really pushes my buttons, you know?
As well as the four of us have become an extended family. And like all families, I'm afraid we know how to press each other's buttons.
In between seasons 3 and 4, the group returned to Earth Prime under the control of the Cro-Mags, and Wade, off-screen, would be bundled off to be used as breeding stock.
You see, the Cro-Mags are doing some interesting experimentation with cross-species replication.
Classy move, Peckinpah. The character would be mentioned here and there throughout the 4th season, but her character was only given a proper and still tragic send-off, sort of, in the 5th season, when Sabrina Lloyd returned. Sort of.
It's Wade!
One question I would like answered: how in the living hell do they not suffer permanent spinal injuries from landing on hard surfaces slide after slide?
I can't move my legs.
If not your back, it can't be good for your knees.
Knock me out!
Hit you with what?
With your fist, you bonehead!
Rembrandt Brown started off as the most reluctant slider of the original quartet of reluctant sliders. Brown was a soul singer famous for his crying man shtick on stage, and was on the cusp of a comeback when he was caught up in the slide that first saw Quinn, Wade and the Professor lost in the multiverse.
But you got to play the hand that you've been dealt. That's all we can do.
Rembrandt would nickname Quinn Cueball, while he himself would often be referred to as Remy. Rembrandt was just desperate to get back to his life and a career that he felt was gathering a second wind.
Trying to be happy for him. I just think he's making a terrible mistake.
Rembrandt can sing like an angel and is mechanically minded from his training in the Navy. He'd later be wrestling with the aftermath of a period of incarceration by the series' recurring villains, the Cro-Mags, who had devastated Earth Prime. After that, he was just searching for a way to get back to Earth Prime with a way to defeat the Cro-Mags and find any of his family still around.
I may have loved it, girl, but I couldn't have survived it. I mean, there is such a thing as too much love. Did you see the Professor?
Oh my God.
Cleavant Derricks would be the only one of the original cast who would appear in all 5 seasons, becoming the series lead in the last year. Cleavant Derricks also had a twin, Clinton, who occasionally appeared in episodes where Rembrandt would meet his alternate. Derricks had appeared in many TV roles, but has had a long career in the theatre and on Broadway.
It's been one of the rules since the get-go.
The most important question about Remy, mustache or no mustache?
No, there's definitely some sort of power struggle going on. Maybe we can use it to our advantage.
If you've seen all of Sliders, you'll be aware of first the cast changing and also the tone of the stories changing each season, sometimes quite radically. Viewing numbers for Sliders were enough for a renewal, but never enough for the show to be left alone by the network, who always wanted more viewers and higher ratings. So cast were either written out or fired or quit, depending on who you ask at what time of day, and the same thing with the producers. Co-creator Tracy Torme had a difficult relationship with Fox, who wanted the show watered down in an attempt to appeal to a wider audience.
Didn't get good reviews, but I loved it.
A bigger audience than just science fiction fans. They'd had great success with the X-Files and couldn't see why Sliders wasn't doing better. Another network request was to make episodes more self-contained without too many continuing story threads so that episodes could be screened in any order. In general, Fox wanted an action-adventure series without too much hard science fiction, which is pretty much what Sliders quickly became, a generic adventure series with that sci-fi MacGuffin. Look, I once ordered a MacGuffin for breakfast and they instead gave me hotcakes.
You know, it seems like everywhere we go to, we have trouble with the food.
The 3rd season was a pivot point for Sliders. Torme slowly stepped back from the series and David Peckinpah enters the picture.
I just hope he hasn't fouled it up messing around with it.
How much time you figure we have left?
Every science fiction series has a name that fans blame for everything that they don't like. And for Sliders, that name is David Peckinpah, seen by fans as the network's guy, despite him working for Universal, the studio that made the show.
There's foul play afoot here, Miss Wells. The challenge is going to be how we prove it.
Changes were at first subtle things, like a brand new theme tune, which was the show's 3rd theme tune in 3 years. But at least this one more or less stuck around for the rest of the series. For the show's 3rd season, production moved from Vancouver to Los Angeles, where this was explained by a minor plot point which amounted to the Sliders now being able to land in a much wider radius, which conveniently and quite coincidentally included Los Angeles.
I mean, how do we know for sure that this is Hollywood?
So while the Sliders could end up in San Francisco...
This is the first time we slipped back into San Francisco since Logan St. Clair messed with the timer.
Chances are wherever they landed would usually resemble somewhere closer to Los Angeles. While the series occasionally shot on location, not far from town, more often than not the series would be shot on Universal's backlot, that series of permanently standing fake city and suburban streets, which you've seen in hundreds of movies and television shows, and apparently 3 seasons of Sliders.
Still San Francisco.
400-mile radius, and we don't go 4 feet.
Welcome to the same old, same old.
Having the show now filmed in the greater Los Angeles area meant that the studio and producers could exert tighter control over the filming. Having the writers and producers in the same city as the cast and crew would keep Sliders' production hopefully running a little more efficiently.
Only one way to find out.
From the 2nd season on, the show would fudge its science to occasionally turn Sliders into a time travel show.
Stuck in a world that's in the technological Stone Age.
Without it explicitly being a time travel show, and so we had worlds that were less advanced than Earth Prime or more advanced. And for reasons sometimes time ran at different speeds, which would allow things like Quinn meeting himself as a child.
Previously on Sliders.
Sliders didn't go in much for recurring characters, mainly because too many references to previous episodes made the network nervous, in much the same way that black van parked out the front of my house makes me nervous. I mean, it is my van, but the park brake's dodgy and I live on a steep hill. Quinn's parents, well, all of them would appear from time to time, most notably his original mother, usually played by the same actress Linda Henning throughout the series. A female version of Quinn, Logan St. Clair, had been introduced in the second season with the idea of her being a recurring character, but apparently the network felt that Zoe McLennan wasn't sexy enough, which coincidentally for some odd reason led me to looking up when LASIK was approved by the FDA. Apparently it was 1999.
On our world, they were an evolutionary dead end. On their world, they killed off our early human ancestors.
Towards the end of the second season, we were introduced to the Cro-Mags, who were the results of evolution splintering off at one point. Across many worlds, the Cro-Mags wanted to enslave, well, whoever. They were an ape-like villain of the week with sliding technology, and they were mostly forgotten about until the fourth season, when the Cro-Mags were in what seemed like every second episode. They were engaged in a war with humans on multiple planets. On some of these worlds they had dominated the humans, while on others the humans had discovered various weapons to destroy the Cro-Mag threat. It does get a bit convoluted at times, but the use of the Cro-Mags would be pulled right back in the show's final season.
Still alive. I like that part.
The final season gave us Dr. Oberon Geiger, who showed up for a few episodes. He was a man who'd become unstuck between dimensions and tried to use his knowledge to merge himself with others. An early experiment resulted in the death of Colin and the merging of Smart Quinn with Dick Quinn.
Things might get a little weird.
How much weirder can they get?
The Sliders' attitude to what was happening to them would differ from character to character and often week to week. In general, we call this the 7 stages of sliding.
You kick me in the ribs, that's what's the matter. Next time we slide, watch where you fail.
Stage 1. Holy shit, we sliding. This is culture shock when you realise that you are jumping into a vortex and will land on a different world.
Well, then what do you call him?
Stage 2. We're totally sliding, dude. The euphoria hit, as sliding brings with it an adrenaline rush. The excitement is the thing, and the Sliders just can't stop.
You cannot affect the weather by smearing yourself with bear scat and prancing around a campfire in your underpants.
It was a good look for him, though.
Stage 3. Okay, so we're sliding, now what? Here's where we get into the nitty-gritty of making the best of the situation. The practical stuff, like the Sliders using the same hotel as a base of operations or a meeting place. Also, we're sometimes shown how the Sliders get by. On some worlds, they take jobs.
My friend here, Mr. Brown, actually cooked in the Navy.
And wait, didn't you wait tables back in high school?
Stage 4. Make sliding work for you. When you're a Slider, contracts and agreements mean jack.
We skip out on the hotel bill too many times or karma's gonna catch up, guys.
Sliding makes behaving unethically or even criminally attractive, since realistically, what are they gonna do?
Either way, though, it's good to have a little traveling money.
It starts off with skipping out on paying a restaurant bill, and then moves up to not repaying loans.
We're just gonna have to steal one.
And finally ends with various universes littered with abandoned luxury cars leased to a see you sucker.
A little hypocrisy is necessary to grease the wheels.
Stage 5. Wow, this sliding bizzo kinda sucks.
Because I'm starting to think that we're never gonna get home.
This is where people become homesick. They become fed up with the constant danger and living hand to mouth.
Condemned to wander the interdimensional vortex like nomads.
Remy would rather go back to his Earth ravaged by the Cro-Mags than slide forever. You know, that sort of thing.
I want to have a baby.
Stage 6. Yes, but if we didn't slide, what else would we do?
Sliding, fighting Cro-Mags, running for our lives every other minute.
That's the life.
This is kind of accepting the realities of sliding, which is something that maybe Maggie probably dealt with best.
Getting pretty used to the sliding lifestyle.
Stage 7. Maybe this is the one. Every now and then a Slider will express a desire to stay on a particular world for one reason or another. Either they're stuck on stage 5 or they've fallen for somebody on a world or whatever. Something will always block this idea and the slides will continue.
Well, let's straight to what we do have left. To friendship.
Friendship.
Then loop back to stage 2 and then repeat endlessly until a Slider dies horribly.
That we have to accept what the world hands us?
As the show progressed, scripts tended to contain far less satire or commentary, a lot of fairly generic action, done reasonably well, a few sci-fi concepts, but it just didn't seem to have the spark seen in early seasons. The first major casualty of these changes was Rhys Davies leaving.
This is a dreadful business, this.
which the actor once described as being fired after the actor had apparently complained at length about scripts, something that has apparently never once happened in the entirety of human creation. In the same episodes, Rhys Davies was written out. A new character, Captain Maggie Beckett, was introduced. Maggie was a military brat and a combat pilot in a war on her Earth. Maggie's world was doomed, with her commanding officer, Colonel Rickman, leading a limited survival project, while also more or less feasting on people's brains. Her reason for sliding was to track down Rickman and bring him to justice. Her husband had been killed by Rickman, but also Who fans will go to any lengths for an autograph.
Your system sucks.
Maggie's always up for a fight, whether it's verbally sparring with her fellow sliders or physically when the need arises. Maggie would develop feelings for Quinn, exemplified by an episode set in a bubble universe where the pair had lived a long life together.
Tight pants!
Actress Kari Wuhrer took a role where, for a change, she could keep her clothes on. Spoke too soon. This is Kari Wuhrer. This is Kari not wearing very much.
Is there any nudity in it?
After Rickman was dealt with, Maggie kept on sliding, mainly because she, like viewers of later seasons, apparently didn't have anything better to do. Various differences between her Earth and Earth Prime meant Maggie couldn't breathe, and so she'd never be able to settle on Earth Prime.
So if this is your home Earth...
Which was something that was quietly forgotten about every time they went back to Earth Prime.
When these numbers run down, if you don't have it back, you're gonna be right up it. Yeah, baby.
Sorry, who knew he was paying attention?
Sliders' ratings on Fox were never anything other than okay.
Time to bail.
But the Sci-Fi Channel saw potential, and after Fox cancelled the series, they swooped in and snapped up the series.
Sliders.
Sci-Fi Channel, still at this point eschewing phonetics, showed many a classic series, and they were owned by Universal. With the 4th season, Sci-Fi Channel mixed in reruns of Sliders with new episodes, which turned out to be one of Sci-Fi Channel's best rating shows.
You really wanted that TV show gig, didn't you?
Tracy Torme made moves to return to the series, but Universal had a standing contract with David Peckinpah, and the guy under contract won out over the series co-creator. There were of course a number of other writers and producers throughout the show's run, but it is safe to say the creative vision that launched the show was rarely to be visible in the show's later seasons.
This world is going to be even worse than the last one.
The 4th season saw more stories involving Cro-Mags, a reduction in the number of big action shows, and a return of more science fiction-oriented plots. Series 4 also brought with it a major reorienting of the series' basic premise, or to be more accurate, Quinn Mallory's backstory.
I have so much to tell you.
Now his parents on Earth were his foster parents, as his real parents were from another Earth, locked in a deadly war with the Cro-Mags. The Sliders had managed to return to Earth Prime only to find it conquered and ravaged by Cro-Mags. Wade had been shipped off to her horrific fate off-screen, and Rembrandt had been imprisoned and brainwashed by the Cro-Mags. Quinn finds an implant from his real parents, laying out the whole deal.
Place you with our duplicates on parallel worlds as foster parents to ensure your safety.
And also, by the way, he has a brother out there. By now, assuming they had the correct coordinates, they could control their slides a little better.
I'm your brother.
Season 4 added a new regular, Colin Mallory, Quinn's biological brother from a technologically backward universe played by Charlie O'Connell, Jerry O'Connell's brother from this backward universe.
Tarnation! They use water! And the paper's so soft. Okay.
Colin was also highly intelligent, but from a world where the technology wasn't much more advanced in the 19th century. Colin was naive, but adapts very quickly.
You say that like it's a bad thing.
Which is a nice way of saying he's written inconsistently, either as very old-fashioned, or he's a skater boy.
What is it?
It's cola.
And what is that?
No one knows.
Having two real-life brothers on a television show who are similar-looking might be hard for Sliders newbies to tell one apart from the other. But one is a taller and skinnier version of the other, so if we say Jerry is Mario, then Charlie is Luigi, in that he's taller and skinnier and probably jumps further but controls worse.
I used that trick I saw in that Penn & Teller special in the last world.
Jerry O'Connell was absolutely everywhere in Sliders this season. He was now credited as a producer. Sometimes a show's lead actor becomes a producer mainly because it's a way of giving your star a reason to stick around, and at other times that star might actually involve themselves in the series production in other ways. Charlie O'Connell coming on as a regular is a big one, but Jerry O'Connell also conceived a story and directed several episodes.
2 hours, 50 minutes, people. Where are you?
A 5th season hadn't been on the cards, but with the series doing well, another year was put together. However, thanks to the original contracts having run out, only Derricks and Wuhrer would return. When you look back, most of the Sliders cast changes were just as a result of money wrangles.
How we fix for cash, Q-Ball?
A little light.
The cast wanted to be paid, while the studio and Sci-Fi Channel did not want to pony up. There was a distinct lack of ponying, which had now led to 3 out of the 4 cast departures. Efforts to bring back Jerry O'Connell at least for a few episodes came to nothing, and, well, the Mallory boys would just sort of vanish into the ether.
Do you hear me? Am I getting through?
Season 5 is either a mess on its own or just a continuation of the mess that began several seasons earlier.
What if you could slide into 1,000 different worlds?
The 5th season gave us 2 new characters. Diana Davis, played by Tembi Locke, was a scientist looking into alternate dimension technology that wasn't all that different from sliding. She learned the true nature of her mentor, Dr. Geiger, and his schemes, which were to combine realities by destroying most of them to make one perfect universe. Diana then joined the Sliders to defeat him. Afterwards, Diana joins the Sliders, where she was the group's resident scientist, but crucially was not at all enjoying the constant danger posed by their adventures.
Near as I can tell, we're caught between dimensions.
And there's Mallory. So this is complicated, but during a slide, Dr. Geiger's plot involved joining Quinn Mallory from Earth Prime, our series lead, and Quinn Mallory from Diana's Earth. Colin seems to have been lost forever, and our Quinn became merged with their Quinn, who for contractual reasons is now our Quinn, but for reasons of clarity would be known as Mallory.
Well, eventually the phase differential will grow so large, he won't be able to exist as either Quinn or Mallory.
While Mallory had Quinn's consciousness for a few episodes, that was quickly gone, and the new Mallory had none of the smarts, acting like a dimension-jumping frat boy, with none of the genius or charm of Quinn, and all of the intense unlikability of an IBS diagnosis.
But in the beginning, it has to start with sex.
If there's a chance that we can separate you from Quinn, we can...
And what if there's not? What if you only get 1 Quinn per customer? Which one do you want?
Robert Floyd was handed the poisoned chalice of a recast and totally different version of the series' original lead.
Made my share of troubles, but I'm different now, okay? 5 years in a wheelchair does that.
Now look, when I say I don't like a character, like for example, if I mention that Tom Paris is a dick, that's the character of Tom Paris, not the actor Robert Duncan McNeil. Watch Voyager and tell me that Tom Paris isn't a dick. Likewise, the Season 5 version of Mallory, let's just say not a fan. I found the character to be obnoxious, and if I were a Slider, I'd make him jump first, and then prefer to spend the next 29 years on the planet overrun by air-breathing walking piranhas with machine guns. The actor's okay in the role, but as for the character as written, Mallory, well, maybe they should call him Quinn Mammory, because, you know, he's a bit of a boob. Diana, on the other hand, well, she's just there and relatively inoffensive. Since all the other intelligent characters had been written out, killed off or whatever, we needed somebody who could explain the technological parts of the plot. Otherwise, who's going to explain what the hell's going on? An ex-soldier, a former singer, or a dick?
You were gonna sell my hair?
Well, that guy from the museum gave me $100 for a toothbrush.
There was an attempt in the 5th season to tie up some loose ends.
Felt like I was living in Wade's memories.
One episode in the middle of the run tried to deal with what happened to Wade Wells. Unfortunately, or fortunately for Sabrina Lloyd, they weren't able to come to terms for her return, but the actress did provide voiceovers and a body double was used for Wade, where Wade had been turned by Cro-Mags into a computer process and, oh my, poor Wade. Ever since Rembrandt's captivity on Earth Prime, he'd wanted to return there with the idea of destroying the Cro-Mags and finding his family. The final episode sees the quartet land on an Earth where the Sliders are celebrities, thanks to a man who's been seeing visions of their adventures.
Professor Arturo! Thank God you are here!
He gives them a stark warning. They will die instantly on their next slide. His daughter wants them to stick around to prop up the cult that sprung up around the idea of slidology.
See what a letter writing campaign can do?
Some people have way too much time on their hands.
The timer is destroyed, but some leftover Cro-Mag sliding gear allows one of them to potentially slide out, and it's Rembrandt who takes the risk. The end. An open-ended cliffhanger for any show's final episode is kind of a bummer, but like a house full of mosquitoes, the door had been left open. Further adventures would be possible, but in the end that was it for this version of Sliders as a television series.
I am standing here like an idiot.
As for the series' highlights and lowlights, or the best and worst, Let's just say the first season is really good, solid, and entertaining, and each subsequent season is slightly less so. The show's still watchable, it just doesn't reach the highs of the first season, where the core idea was a driver of the plots rather than just a means to put the Sliders on another variation on Earth.
Our particles must be smaller, allowing the blue to pass, but capturing the violet, causing our sky to appear lilac.
Oh, that sort of takes all the mystery out of it, doesn't it?
A planet where there's been a prohibition on caffeine, a planet where everyone's using VR, where aluminium, aka aluminum, had not been invented, a world where drug use was mandatory. I mean, what's next? A world where Doom was a clone of Duke Nukem 3D?
And I feel betrayed.
The second season introduced stories with more fantasy elements and moved away from the Earth was the same, but just a little different. The human side of the drama also started to take a backseat to things like mystics, dinosaurs, and ghost stories. Post-traumatic slide syndrome saw the group apparently get home, or at least an Earth that was close enough to consider staying, when Arturo publicly takes credit for Quinn's work in sliding.
The father of interdimensional travel, Maximilian Arturo.
Turns out that the real Arturo had been imprisoned by the local duplicate. The story was apparently a way for producers to send a hint to John Rhys Davies that he wasn't irreplaceable.
We've got an Arturo and we don't even know which one he is.
For me, Season 3 seemed to be the least interesting, with mostly one-off episodes with quite dull plots. Arturo had been diagnosed with a terminal illness, but once it kept quiet. And now with Californian locations, it wasn't always deathly cold. Also, lots of stories liberally borrowed from movies.
Oh my god! I can't believe this is happening!
We had riffs on Mad Max.
We rescued a biker babe that rides with Mad Max.
Twister.
This is what brought the Twister.
The Island of Dr. Moreau, Apocalypse Now, Species. It was starting to get a bit silly when you land in a modern world that's dominated by ancient Egypt. There's a minor upswing with John Rhys Davies' last episodes, where Rhys Davies helped devise a way for writing out his character. Maggie's also introduced, and Roger Daltrey introduced as her maniacal CEO, Rickman.
Then you better join me in praying you're wrong.
Even so, Fox's wishes for no continuing story didn't seem to have been listened to, since a few episodes in the last part of the third season detailed the hunt for the new-look Rickman, which wouldn't have made all that much sense viewed out of order. Though realistically they didn't make all that much sense one way or the other.
3 years ago on your home world, I gave you the final part of the equation.
Roger Daltrey was no longer available, and Rickman was played by Neil Dixon from the mid-80s Biggles movie, since he was more available than a singer who was destined to make a fortune from CSI reruns.
Hey, how about that? Those crazy sliders?
Season 4 settled down slightly. It had taken a few episodes each for Kari Wuhrer and Charlie O'Connell to find their characters. In the middle of the year, there was one of the show's better episodes, the comedy-focused Lipschitz Live, which gave Charlie O'Connell a dual role and turned out to be one of my favourite episodes.
I do smoke. Who the devil are you and where's our friend?
Hey, get your hands off me. Like the man said, Colin Mallory married Roxanne Crane.
The fourth season's penultimate episode saw Quinn and Maggie spending a lifetime together in a bubble universe, and was quite a poetic episode. However, the Cro-Mags appearing every other week were a drag. The Sci-Fi Channel didn't seem to mind viewers needing to have watched previous episodes, since by now they had a captive audience, people who were tuning into the Sci-Fi Channel specifically to see a show like Sliders. Season 5 would likewise be variable in the sorts of stories it told, but was at its best when it concentrated on Rembrandt and Maggie, and greatly diminished whenever Mallory was given jokes.
Naturally, she thought I was.
He spent the night with Monique.
What?
It's not what you think.
It's not what we think.
Whatever.
I did think the fifth season, unlike Quinn Mallory, started to pull itself together in the second half, where the series worked towards a satisfying climax, if not a definitive conclusion. The producers were likely hoping for another season, but Sliders ended after nearly 90 episodes.
What do we do now?
Being a show from the 1990s, Sliders was an early adopter of computer graphics for its effects. Quite honestly, a lot of what was in the show just would not have been doable in any other way, especially not on a television budget or schedule. Computer graphics for photoreal effects and television was in its relative infancy, and Sliders went all in. CG was used for the vortex, travelling through the wormholes, augmenting, establishing shots, that sort of thing. As the series progressed and effects houses got a handle on what was possible,
Yeah, that's a T-Rex.
along with improvements to both computing hardware and software, the effects improved, or at least allowed the writers to go a little further with some story ideas. I mean, if you wanted twisters or dinosaurs or dragons or spaceships, you could have them. The show didn't go too hard into stunt casting, but you would occasionally see a few familiar faces in the guest cast. In general though, you had to be the sort of person who watched all of the science fiction shows on the air at the time to recognise many of the guest cast. Oh look, some folks from Babylon 5, or Star Trek.
The perfect human.
Some random actors in early roles before they became big. There's also a fun appearance from Tracy Torme's father, jazz legend Mel Torme.
You think they're here to keep us here?
They're sure not Trekkies.
I just wish they had slid onto a world where Sean Connery was a continuity announcer for a local television station. Tonight on KRAK, Sliders, Sequest, Scarecrow and Mrs. King, The Simpsons, and our movie presentation of Melvin Van Peebles' classic Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song.
I think we'll buy that channel. That shows nothing but science fiction programming.
Sliders is a show fondly remembered by fans, less so by the cast members who seem mucked around by producers, the network and the studio. Also, that Funny or Die sketch with Jerry O'Connell was fantastic.
That's obviously someone's idea of a bad joke.
If the producers had issues with a cast member, for example wanting pay parity with their castmates, they were brutally killed off. Apparently being a cast member of Sliders was like working for a spy agency. There's only one way out.
You haven't seen the things I've seen.
There's definitely a skewing of fan affection towards the original group of Sliders, and I'd mainly have to agree that the original quartet made even lesser scripts more fun to watch.
Everyone is a bit mad here.
Most of the later cast editions would find a groove, and I quite liked them. I did say most.
I don't get it.
The series' most valuable player for me would have to be Cleavant Derricks as Rembrandt, who turned a comic relief character into a really effective leader of the Sliders by the show's end.
Who's the baddest dude around? Downtown Brown.
I had watched most of Sliders on its original broadcasts, but I did fall off at some point, probably around the end of the third season. So coming back to watch the whole thing years later gave me a little perspective on what I felt worked and who I felt did not.
It really doesn't bother me either.
I found it much easier to enjoy the series as it morphed and changed now than I did back in the 90s. Other things that I find easier to do now than in the 90s, watching movies made after the year 2000.
Oh my God, it's my wife. Oh, I love you, Charlotte. Forgive me.
Some of the cast of Sliders have been more visible than others in the years since the show ended, just as some seem happy to not be reminded of their association with the series.
Let's do this!
Sliders gave us duplicates and doppelgangers, some great what-if scenarios, and then a lot of low-rent rip-offs of popular movies of the era.
And I know you're tired of this mess.
However, unlike a lot of 90s series, it wasn't a simple clone of the X-Files or Star Trek The Next Generation.
I'm feeling original. Make mine the same.
It was something just a bit different, for a while at least.
And yet, despite all of this, you are a fool.
If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.
Tickets, please. Just kidding.